Hi there, welcome to the Heights School. I'm Alex Berthet with Mentors Compass. Today's topic is more on the practical side, and that is how to take good lecture notes in class, like a humanities class or a history class, a non-technical class, and then how to make the most of those notes. So several issues I notice with boys who struggle taking notes and then corresponding recommendations. Number one, they only write down what the teacher writes on the board. And maybe that's all they need to write down. The boy sees the teacher writing on the board and he's like, oh, that's my cue. Something important is being discussed. It's time to tune in and write something down. But there's always a possibility that there is other important information that a teacher may not feel like writing down, but nonetheless consider important and include in his lecture, and a boy may be required to know. So, recommendation number one, encourage your mentee to get a good feel for whether or not the teacher shares important information that he's expected to know that is not written on the board. He can learn this through experience or just by asking his teacher. Another problem I've noticed is that boys' notebooks can be random. Random in the sense that one notebook may contain notes for history, problem sets for math, the day's homework assignments for some of the classes on one page and other subjects on another page. And then to make things even more confusing, these pieces of information may be sprawled out on random pages throughout the notebook. Similarly, adding to the randomness, notes aren't always written in chronological order. So on one page, there's notes for May 16th, and then 5 pages later, there are notes for April 4th. And as if that wasn't confusing enough, many times there's no heading or indication of what the topic is, in advance of the notes. So as you can imagine, this makes it very challenging to figure out how to make sense of what's been written down and can add considerable time to one's studying efforts. So, my recommendation number two, help your mentee stay organized by keeping one notebook per class. Make sure his notebooks are clearly labeled by subject. In fact, I know teachers who encourage their students to color code their notebooks by putting colored duct tape strips along the binders to make them easily recognizable, easy to identify when pulling that notebook from their locker. Additionally, encourage him to keep orderly notes, a new page for each lesson, a title at the top, the day's date in the right or left-hand corner, maybe even what quarter and week it is next to the date. The key here is the notes should be sequential and easy to make sense of and in the appropriate notebook. A third common problem is that notes can look like isolated facts, right? Unrelated facts that have been written on the same piece of paper back to back, and it's tough to later draw conclusions about what you've written, or to just put it simply, tough to study from. And this could be for many reasons. Maybe it really is the teacher. I've had teachers who are very methodical, left-brain people, and their notes on the board reflected their personalities, and it was easy to know what one was responsible for knowing. Right? All I had to do was copy the board and learn the material. I've also had teachers whose notes reflected more of their free spirit, if you will, and perhaps what was written on the board wasn't even that important, or maybe it was, but there were arrows going all over the place and things that were written diagonally and vertically and horizontally and backwards and all over the place, and it was just tough to make sense of afterwards, and I had to pour through the textbook and figure, okay, what's going on here? But more within a boy's sphere of influence, his notes might look like isolated facts because maybe he's trying to write every single word down that the teacher says, and it's hard to keep up. Tangential topics might be brought up by the teacher or fellow students, and again, in the end, it's just tough to piece all that information together into a coherent whole when it comes time to study, right? Like, what does all this information mean? So, recommendation number three is this. For non-technical classes, right? And that's math-based classes, they're different, right? But my recommendation for your humanities, your history classes, etc., is for you to encourage your mentee to be on the hunt for big ideas during lectures. That's what teachers are mainly looking for in these classes, is understanding of big ideas and the ability to compare and contrast them, possibly even reevaluate them in a new light. So the QEC method is great for this. QEC stands for question, evidence, conclusion. In this method, all the information that's recorded is associated with a well-labeled question. For example, why was Lincoln's assassination bad news for the South during the Reconstruction era? And then each question is paired with a well-labeled conclusion. And between the paired questions and conclusions, a student should jot down the evidence that supports the conclusion or leads to a conclusion that one can infer the teacher is trying to make. All right, so that's the general gist of it. You might need to rewind that a little bit or just Google it. But the QEC method is great for just recording facts and observations and fitting them into a nice, simple structure. Now there's many ways to take notes, obviously, and this is just one of them. But again, you can check it out on Google, or better yet, DuckDuckGo. It's more private. The last issue I want to point out is that of cramming. We've all been there. Cramming huge amounts of information that stays in our noggin just long enough for us to do well or well enough or maybe not even that well on a test. And to complicate matters even more, trying to decipher what those notes mean from earlier in the semester or quarter and trying to relearn it all, right? Just super time consuming. Ideally, and this is what you can encourage your mentee to do, he should review his notes immediately after class or later on after school on the same day to let the information really sink in. Now this is what I like to call extra work, but as with most good things in life, it's pay now or pay later. And if you can encourage your mentee to pay now while the information is fresh in his mind, it's going to make his life a whole lot easier come test time. Not to mention, he's going to process that information in real time. It's just going to make it so much easier to learn. So practical pointers that can help him in this area: he may consider rewriting or reformatting his notes after class. Right? The key here is doing whatever it takes to make his notes easier to read and comprehend. He can organize them by big ideas. He can type them out as opposed to handwriting them, underline them, indent them, put things in bold, whatever it is, right? But if he works efficiently, in theory, he could get this done in 10 to 20 minutes. You know, it's pays big dividends down the road, right? So pay now or pay later. I like to say, do things now that your future self will say thank you for. So you can encourage your mentee to do that. So that's our time for this week. I know it's weird that I'm making a video on note-taking at the end of the school year, but the year is not over yet, and you can always keep this in your back pocket for next year. But in any case, thank you so much for joining us here at the Heights School and Mentors Compass. I'm Alex Bertay. See you next time.